Can you understand me?
Hello everyone, Kier here, and welcome to the InfiNOT podcast. I'm focused on the casual nature of the game, and each week I discuss the new patch, the new card, and my feelings on the game. Let's hop into it. So, this week we don't have a new card necessarily, as the spotlights are cards that we've seen before, like Hope Summers and Proxima Midnight, but we did get a new patch on July 30th, and we also got an OTA today, actually. So we're going to go over those two, and there's a lot to discuss here, so I want to make sure that I can squeeze it all in. Let's first begin with the patch notes. So on July 30th, the game updated, and alliances showed up. So alliances, of course, are like guilds. You pick a couple of friends and you all can join in. I do also have a guild. If you still have not found a guild that you are a part of, you can find us at the InfiNOTs, and it's pretty fun. I was surprised at how simple it was in comparison to some of the other guild systems I've seen before. In this particular instance, the thing that struck me as interesting is the missions that you pick don't appear automatically. You do have to go in and pick them manually for your guild if you're the alliance leader. So I picked a couple, and the alliance that I'm a part of I think we completed one so far. And yeah, it's interesting, although I will say the requirements to get rewards out of these bounties is pretty high. There is a level of commitment there, and I'll be interested to see how I feel about it going forward. If you're in an alliance like mine, which is only somewhat active, there's a good chance that you might only complete one or two during a given week. And the rewards for that are sort of all over the place. But yeah. So alliances are cool. I have my criticisms, but they're extra things to do in the game. I'm all good for that. And the coolest part about alliances, in my opinion, is just that sense of community. There's a chat where you can talk together. You can brand your alliance with some icons that are available and some backgrounds. It's pretty neat, and I hope that they continue to build on that by adding more backgrounds and icons, and really honing in on that sense of individualism in a community. Moving on, the most significant change we've seen to the shop in a very long time also came out during this patch, and it's technically a better thing. Now, each day, you have the ability to get 75 credits in the shop for free. It used to be that you could go in there and get 50 a day. However, there's a caveat. It's changing for 50 a day to 25 every 8 hours. So if you're extra active in the game, you're going to get more rewards. But if you're not, let's say you only hop on once a day, you're not going to get as many. So, pros and cons. To me, it feels like one of the guys at Second Dinner was like, hey, boss, wouldn't it be cool if I could update the shop and give our players more rewards? And the guys at the top are like, well, you can't just give them more stuff. You gotta do something here. You gotta increase retention, or balance that out with another feature. And so they were like, well, we can increase retention if we make it cycle more, but they're technically getting more resources. That's sort of the vibe that I get off of it. Okay, yeah. So another thing too, Moon Knight got some awesome new effects, and his card text has changed, and we're going to talk about that. Super cool. So let's actually get into the changes on the cards. So Owatu, finally, they let it out of the bag. He can now see all locations at the start of the game. Thank you. He's a playable card. Guys, he's playable. It's like Quake that you don't even have to play. You can just put your cards where they need to, get into a locked location early. I like it. Shadow King. So Shadow King had an interaction change, and without getting into the nitty-gritty, essentially now he cleanses buffs and nerfs rather than fixing it with another number. So like when you click on a card, at the top of the card, you'll see any modifiers to that card. Like if they've been hit with an Ironheart, they'll have a +2 on there. And what Shadow King used to do was he'd look at the base card's value and then add that as another number to create the difference. So like if you had a Kitty Pryde that was 6 power, he would do -5 to make it 1. But that made things confusing, and in my opinion, I think this is a lot better. So now he just removes all and any effects on there. So if, you have a Sunspot that was buffed by himself, and then had a minus at Thunderbolt's Tower, and then had an additional minus by a Wasp, but then he grew again and got 3, it's just going to get rid of all of it. It's just going to delete those changes, which is interesting. I think this does actually make Shadow King a lot better, because now Luke Cage can't protect him, because Luke Cage makes it so cards cannot increase or decrease their value, but it doesn't stop it from cleansing their value, which is what Shadow King is going to be doing here. Very cool. I'm all for it. It gives Shadow King a little bit more of a use case, and now people can't just throw Luke Cage as a universal tech card. Now you have to make a decision on, like, okay, do I want Luke Cage in here for the specific purpose of protecting me against, like, locations and stuff, not just, I don't want to get Shadow Kinged. Additionally, Moon Knight. So Moon Knight's stats did not change, but his animations look sick, and it says, on reveal, discard a card with an even cost from each player's hand. This used to be random. I love this change. I've been throwing him into a couple of my discard decks. I have a Black Knight deck that I've been using. Super fun. This is a great change. And it's so simple, too. They didn't, destroy the card's identity with this. They also say that they didn't want to fundamentally change the card for fans it already has, as they did with Adam Warlock. And that's interesting to me, because Adam Warlock felt like a case where they were more concerned about making him too strong. And so what ended up happening is the few people that did play Adam Warlock sincerely at 2-0 with like a Bast combo or something were pretty upset. But I don't know if I would say Adam Warlock had a bunch of fans. It's interesting that they point that out. But yeah, the things that they also point out is that it works better with Stature and Black Bolt now, because those are, odd cost cards, and Moon Knight works better at discarding things like Apocalypse and Swarm, because those are even cost numbers. Very, very cool. Blink also got a minor... well, it's an interesting change. I don't know how minor it is or isn't, but essentially, they made it so she works more like Jane Foster does when Jane Foster looks at your deck. So what she does is she looks for the ability to check the cards in your deck based on what they currently cost, not their original cost. So basically, when a negative Iron Man was 0-5, like in a negative deck, both Jane and Blink could grab that Iron Man, because Jane would look at the 0 and Blink would look at the 5, like the original cost of Iron Man, and they both would grab him, which they didn't like. So they made it more consistent. Blink now looks at what they currently cost, which is interesting. And they also mention here that they changed the text on a lot of cards because they want to establish that cost means printed energy cost versus cost as in modified cost. So you'll see a bunch of changes in the cards. They reworded some things to make more sense. And they changed a couple of the cards here, like Yondu, Colleen Wing, Black Bolt, Lady Sif, White Queen Jane Foster, and Mirage. So those have been changed. Also, Throne Room has been changed, so they more accurately look correct to what they're actually doing, because cost versus capital C cost are different now. Yeah, so that is the entirety of the patch notes for July 30th. It should be noted, too, we're getting our first league that is going to be starting on August 8th, and They're limited time events where you can, compete against other players in your league to get rewards. Very cool. I'm glad that those are coming to the game. It hopefully will spice things up. I'm always for giving more incentives to grind out the game. And that pretty much covers it. I would say overall, I really liked this patch. Not just because I'm all for consistency, but Moon Knight feels incredible to play. And I've been trying to get that Awatu change for as long as he's been in the game. So, very, very cool. Moving on, we have the OTA updates, and these are pretty spicy. I've seen a couple of different opinions on it, and I'll share mine as we go through. Let's just talk about the number changes, just the flat number changes first, and then we can get into, the nitty-gritty ones. So, Apocalypse was changed to a 6/8. I'm all for it. Traditional discard has fallen to the wayside a bit with how predictable their power is. And so if you're going to make a case to play that deck, you do need a strong finisher. And I think Apocalypse does exactly that. 6/6 also just felt weird because if you discarded Apocalypse, he would be a 6/10. So there really wasn't an incentive to do it once. You had to do it twice to even get additional value. But now that he's a 6/8 and he gets the +4 power, one discard turns him into functionally the Hulk, which is the bare minimum acceptable to playing him by himself. Blob also got a change so that he no longer merges cards from your deck until he's 15 power, but instead 13 power. I don't know if this is a hot take. I actually don't really like this change. I understand that Arishem is strong, which is why they're trying to, temper down the power of this card. But he already has so many counters, and Blob wasn't seeing a tremendous amount of play in other decks. So it's curious to me that they felt like they needed to make him this weak. If we're looking at on paper, right, this is only barely better than Hulk, and you have to build your deck to accommodate it. I'm not a huge fan of this change, personally. I hope that in the future they look into directly targeting Arishem instead of doing what they're doing to these cards, which I'll get into in a moment. War Machine went to a 4/7. Okay. I like this because in the decks where you're playing War Machine, you want to play him on 5, so that way you could throw down a big InfiNOT or throw down an Ebony Maw and another big card. And on turn 5, you want to have stats that are acceptable. With Hydra Bob in the game, if you throw War Machine and Hydra Bob at the same time, that's a 5/12, which is acceptable for a 5 cost. I think that it is now what it needs to be in order to feel like a functional card. Obviously, he also has spots in other places, but the War Machine decks in particular, I think, are really going to enjoy this change. I want to experiment and see if I can throw Ebony Maw, Hydra Bob, and a couple of other cool cards together and make a deck out of it. I'm a big fan of playing the InfiNOT on turn 6. That's pretty cool. And last but not least, the Widow's Kiss got a change. Thank God. It is no longer -4 power at a location where it's not full. It is instead -3. This card I could rant about all day. It's a 2/2 that is functionally a 2/6, and it has clog potential, and it's really good into a lot of locations that lock cards out. It just has a little bit of everything, and that's why you're seeing it in almost every mid-range deck ever, and sometimes in other decks too. It's because of numbers and because of disruption. It is far and away the best 2-drop, in my opinion. So this is tuning it down a bit to be closer to a 2/5, which I feel is reasonable. Is it always going to be a 2/5? No. Sometimes it's going to be a 2/2. But again, that disruption is so important. And putting a card there prevents more cards from being there to add power. So it could be a 2/20 or something. It's ridiculous. It's a very strong card. I'm glad that they changed it. I feel like this is a bit more fair. Okay, so let's get into the text changes. Doc Ock was a menace. Arishem made this card so insanely broken because it's functionally a Professor X, especially doing it on turn 4 was very, very brutal. So they changed the card. Again, wish they would look at Arishem first, but they made it so it is now a 4-8 instead of a 5-10. And on reveal, pull the lowest power card from your opponent's hand to their side of this location. So this is interesting to me because it's almost like a worse Gladiator in a lot of circumstances. Gladiator, of course, pulls a random card from your opponent's deck, and if it's a lower power, it destroys it. This is tricky to me. I think in clog decks, there's still value to this card. I think he's still going to see play, but man, this effect could really, really hurt you, especially if it's card, because it's the lowest power and not the lowest cost. That means that these cards with the lowest power are going to have a lot of high impact, especially on the turn you play Doc Ock, which is turn 4, right? So you could get an Iron Man, you could get a Blob, you could get a Dark Hawk. These cards that like normally would be a tough compensation, or they have a huge upside, but their base power is low. On the other hand, right, this does mean that like when you pull a Shang-Chi, you're super happy about it. It means that you have effectively disabled that card. So good on them. I think that this change is going to positively affect the game. I don't know if Doc Ock is going to find a place unless it's in Clog, which maybe that's where he belongs. Okay, Leech was changed again. We've seen this card go through so many iterations. He is now a 4/4 that says remove the text from 6 cost cards in your opponent's hand. This used to be on reveal abilities. And in the dev notes, they talk about the idea that Leech is supposed to be a stopgate for like big turn 6 plays, but he's never found that place because oftentimes the decks that use Leech are abusing his ability to protect themselves instead of, turning off a combo play. This makes it so that it is almost exclusively a way for you to say no to a Red Hulk, to a Hela, to whatever. And since it's 4 cost, you can play it on a turn that's relevant, right? Most ramp decks get a 6 cost out on 5. So this is still relevant. Is it always going to be helpful? No. And I think that Leech is going to dramatically drop in play. Especially at the stat line. At a 4/4, your opponent might not even have a 6 cost in their deck. So it is risky. It is low power. I would suspect that they're going to change this card to like a 4/6 or a 4/7 at some point. He's just too situational right now. Okay, this is a big change too. And I'm particularly happy about this change. I've been a Loki hater for a very long time. Loki is a 3/5 now, but he replaces your deck with your opponent's starting deck, and it gives them -1 cost, and then draws you a card. So functionally, what this does is it changes a Loki deck from something that wants card generation to rapidly fill your hand and then beat your opponent down with numbers to like a slow burn leader, where you are essentially turning your deck into your opponent's deck, and the goal is to outplay them with their own cards. Because previously, you weren't really let's be clear, you weren't really outplaying your opponent when you can throw down, 30 power and stats with their deck on turns 5 and 6 with the previous Loki. You were just beating them because you could play more stats at a cheaper rate. Now it's more a case where you'll have to use your own cards and your opponent's cards to make something happen. I think this is more fair as a concept. You're making a sacrifice. You're not going to be able to, one of the most frustrating things about Loki is you would say, okay, they have my cards, but surely they didn't draw their Shang-Chi, and lo and behold, they do. That's no longer going to be the case, and it's only going to be the case if they have previously drawn into those things. So when to play Loki is actually an interesting question. The earlier you play him, the more cards you get, of course, but the drawback is that you might not have those tech cards that you want or those pieces that you want in a game. So, interesting dynamic. I like this new Loki. I feel like this is more fair. Am I still going to be mad when he beats me? Yes, but it's not nearly as unfair of a card as I feel it was before. So those are the changes. in the OTA and the patch. I talked a bit about alliances and a little bit about leagues. I'm still going to see how that feels. But overall, what do I think about the game right now? I feel like it's in a good spot, guys. It does feel like the game is in a pretty good spot. Right now, the meta is a little bit shaky. Arishem is still doing pretty well, but now there are more mid-range decks coming in. And games are going to be a lot closer than they were before. I think that's okay. I'm actually fine for that. There's going to be a lot more diversity. I'm happy right now with the game. It's pretty good. And I hope you guys are enjoying it too. Please don't forget to rate this podcast. Let me know how I'm doing. And if you want to ask me a question, you can find me at Kiernimbus on YouTube. And if you're still looking for an alliance to join, you can search INF or the InfiNOTs, or InfiNOTs, not the InfiNOTs, InfiNOTs, and you'll find the guild that I'm a part of. I keep saying guilds. I'm never going to get this right. All right, that's enough for me. If there's one thing that you can remember, it's that I'm InfiNOT. Thanks for listening.